Hello guys, welcome back to the channel YouTube Demystified, and let us continue with our BA Philosophy Honors ka semester 3. So we have already started with Western philosophy, Descartes to Kant, and we are starting with Unit 1, that is basically based on rationalism and empiricism. जिसमें हमने we have learned a little about what is rationalism, what is empiricism. Then we have in a little detail learned about the intuition deduction thesis. Now let us know more about the innate knowledge thesis. So basically, innate knowledge thesis is something that is only accepted by the rationalists and not much by the empiricists. The empiricists reject this thesis. So innate knowledge thesis asserts that we have a priori knowledge, that means we already have knowledge which is independent, and it is independent of sense experience. That is knowledge that we have not gained through any senses, and it is already a part of our nature. So we are basically born with that knowledge, and experience just triggers our awareness about that knowledge. That means the knowledge is already present, but when we experience something, the knowledge is triggered, and from our consciousness it is brought out into our awareness. So the knowledge is already present there. Plato represents an early version of the innate knowledge thesis in the Meno as the doctrine of knowledge by recollection. That means the knowledge is already present in us, the experience helps us to trigger it, and we recollect it. Okay. So the doctrine is motivated in part by a paradox that arises when we attempt to explain the nature of inquiry. So how do we gain knowledge of a theorem in geometry? We inquire into the matter. Yet knowledge by inquiry seems impossible. We either already know the theorem at the start or we do not. So if we already have the knowledge, there is no place for inquiry. If we lack the knowledge, we don't know what we are seeking and cannot recognize it and when we find it. So either way, we cannot gain knowledge of the theorem by inquiry, yet we do know some theorems. That means that we already know that theorem. If we don't know anything about that theorem, or if we don't have any knowledge about it, then no matter how much we inquire, we will not be able to find the answer ever, because we know nothing about it. But because we already know that theorem, we start when we start it, when we experience something, that is when we recollect the theorem and that knowledge. Now, the doctrine of knowledge by recollection offers a solution. So, when we inquire into the truth of a theorem, we both do and we do not already know it. So, why are we saying that we know it and we don't know it? That is because the knowledge is innate in us. That means it is mixed with our nature, it is a part of our nature, but we don't have any recollection of it. We are not aware about it. So we already know the knowledge, but we don't know it because we are not aware of it. We have knowledge in the form of a memory gained from our soul's knowledge of the theorem prior to its union with the body. So we know it beforehand. We also lack some knowledge because in our soul's unification with the body, it has forgotten the knowledge and now needs to recollect it. Thus, learning the theorem allows us, in fact, to recall what we already know. That means the knowledge was already mixed with the soul, and when the soul unified with the body, that is when the knowledge embedded in us. And with experience, the knowledge is triggered and we experience it, we become aware of it. Plato famously illustrates a doctrine with an exchange between Socrates and a young slave, in which Socrates guides the slave from ignorance to mathematical knowledge. It's about Meno. So there are many dialogues of Socrates with Meno. The slave's experiences in the form of Socrates' questions and illustrations are the occasion for his recollection of what he learned previously. That means, in the particular dialogue, if we have time, we'll certainly discuss that particular dialogue about Socrates when he's talking to Meno, and how Socrates just asks questions, and of course he asks whether he knows about that particular knowledge or not, and the slave refuses, he doesn't know. And when Socrates starts questioning him, he gives the answers, and at the end it is established that Meno already knew it, just by giving answers without Socrates or anybody else telling him. So Plato's metaphysics provides the additional support for the innate knowledge thesis. Since our knowledge is of abstract eternal forms which clearly lie beyond our sensory experience, it is independent for its justification of experience. So this is again something that we have read in our theory of forms by Plato, that how the forms are the reality, but they are untouched, and we don't see them as reality. They are perfect, and whatever we see in the material world is just a shadow of those forms. Contemporary supporters of Plato's position are scarce. The initial paradox, which Plato describes as a trick argument, rings sophistical. The metaphysical assumptions in the solution need justification. The solution does not answer the basic question: just how did the slave soul learn the theorem? So Socrates was able to prove that, uh, through the Socrates dialogues with the slave, with Meno, Plato supported the thesis of innate knowledge, that the knowledge is already present in us. But then again, there's a very basic question, that how does the soul learn of all these? How does the soul gain the knowledge? The intuition deduction thesis offers an equally, if not more plausible account of how the slave gains this type of knowledge that is independent of experience. So, again, the slave deducted these things. Nonetheless, Plato's position illustrates the kind of reasoning that has caused many philosophers to adopt some form of the innate knowledge thesis. We're confident that we know certain propositions about the external world, but there seems to be no adequate explanation of how we gained this knowledge, short of saying that it is innate. Okay, so we do know that there are some things, some knowledge that we have not gained through experience, but then how did we gain it? Even through the innate knowledge thesis, how it is that the soul has learned of all that knowledge. Its content is beyond what we directly gain in experience, as well as what we can gain by performing mental operations and what experience provides. It does not seem to be based on an intuition or deduction. That it is innate in us appears to be the best explanation. So even through intuition deduction, when we say that, how even through intuition that we know something, so the best possible explanation for that kind of knowledge that we have not gained through any sense experience, and we don't know intuitively, is that it was innate in us, it was already embedded in us, and through that experience it may have triggered into our awareness. Now, Chomsky argues along similar lines in presenting what he describes as a rationalist conception of the nature of language. So Chomsky argues that the experiences available to language learners are far too sparse to account for their knowledge of their language. To explain language acquisition, we must assume that learners have an innate knowledge of a universal grammar, capturing the common deep structure of natural languages. It is important to note that Chomsky's language learners do not know particular propositions describing a universal grammar. So then again, Naum Chomsky talks about the language. We have seen that how kids learn their mother tongue at a very particular, very early age, even if before they start studying and learning and all sort of things. So how does that happen? That happens because, according to Chomsky, we already have an innate knowledge of the root of all the languages, the basic grammar of all the languages. There are some basic things that in every language there'll be a masculine, feminine, there'll be singular, plural. So that is something that will be there in all the languages. So we already have a knowledge of that deep and root structure of all the languages, the common grammar capturing all the languages. They have a set of innate capacities or dispositions which enable and determine their language development. Chomsky gives us a theory of innate learning capacities or structures rather than a theory of innate knowledge. So Chomsky gives us that we have learning capacities, we have innate learning capacities. Okay, his view does not support the innate knowledge thesis as rationalists have traditionally understood it. So Chomsky does support the innate knowledge thesis, but not in the traditional or conventional way as the rationalists have always understood and supported it. So, how Chomsky puts it is, Chomsky's principles are innate neither in the sense that we are explicitly aware of them, nor in the sense that we have a disposition to recognize their truth as obvious under appropriate circumstances. And hence, it is by no means clear that Chomsky is correct in seeing his theory as following the traditional rationalist account of the acquisition of knowledge. So, indeed, such a theory which places nativism at the level of mental capacities or structures enabling us to acquire certain types of knowledge rather than at the level of knowledge we already possess is akin to an empiricist take on the issue. So Locke and Reid, for instance, believe that the human mind is endowed with certain abilities that, when developed in the usual course of nature, will lead us to acquire useful knowledge of the external world. So according to Chomsky, the innate knowledge is not taken as it is as by other rationalists. According to Chomsky, we have innate capabilities, learning capabilities. We may not have that innate knowledge in us, but we have that innate capability of learning. We have those potential in us, that capability in us to learn something, to acquire a skill, or any of that. So, like Locke and Reed also believed that the human mind is endowed with certain abilities, and that abilities, when put to the best use, we acquire certain skills by it. The main idea is that it is part of our biology to have a digestive system. When fed the right kind of food, allows us to process the required nutrients to enable us to continue to live for a while. So they are explaining the view with an example of our digestive system, that we all have a digestive system, and when we feed it the right kind of food, it automatically processes the food to get us the required nutrients always. And in the same way, we have that certain set of abilities and capabilities, and when we're put into right kind of environment, into the right kind of things provided to us, we acquire that certain knowledge and skill. The knowledge itself is no more innate than the processed nutrients are. So we don't have the nutrients beforehand, but we have that system and that machinery to process the nutrients when the item is put in it. So in the same way, we don't have the knowledge innate with us, but the capability and the ability to gain that knowledge when we are fed with the right kind of information. So in a view, like this, no knowledge is innate. However, we are born with certain capabilities and disposition that enable us to acquire knowledge, just as we are equipped with certain organs that allows our body to function well while we are alive. So this was Chomsky's view of the innate knowledge thesis. It is, we cannot say a part of the innate knowledge thesis, but yes, it is very much similar to it, but a little different on a stance. Now, Peter Carruthers argues that we have innate knowledge of the principles of folk psychology. Now, folk psychology is a network of common sense generalizations that hold independently of context or culture and concern the relationships of mental states to one another, to the environment and states of the body, and to behavior. It includes such beliefs as that pains tend to be caused by injury, that pains tend to prevent us from concentrating on tasks, and that perceptions are generally caused by the appropriate state of the environment. So, now according to Carruthers, there are some things, the folk psychology. Now, the folk psychology, as the name, what is a folk tale? A folk tale is something that is common to a group of people. Okay, so a folk psychology is a very generalized thing that, independent of the context or culture the person is living in, independent of the language the person speaks, the nation the person belongs to, there are some things, you know, that are common to everybody. For example, the it's given here, their belief that pain tends to be caused by injury, that wherever there is injury it causes pain, and that pain prevents us from concentrating on tasks. So everywhere, no matter wherever we go, we'll hear the same thing, that when a person is in pain, that person will not be able to concentrate on a particular task, and that is known by everybody around. So that is what is folk psychology. Carruthers notes the complexity of folk psychology along with its success in explaining our behavior, and the fact that its explanation appealed to such unobservables as beliefs, desires, feelings, and thoughts. He argues that the complexity, universality, and depth of folk psychological principles outstrips what experience can provide, especially to young children who by their fifth year already know a great many of them. So all of that we know through the folk psychology are complex, but they are universal, and they outstrip what experience provide us. And how Caritas tries to explain his point is that even a boy or a girl who is 5 years old already knows many of these things. So how does that 5-year-old child knows it? It's not because of experience, because he hasn't had that much experience, but it is because of the folk psychology. This knowledge is also not the result of intuition or deduction. Folk psychological generalizations are not seen to be true in an act of intellectual insight. Carter concludes concerning the child's acquisition of psychological generalizations cannot be solved unless we suppose that much of folk psychology is already innate, triggered locally by the child's experience of itself and others rather than learned. So all these generalizations are already present within the child, and they are just triggered when the child experiences them. Empiricists and some rationalists attack the innate knowledge thesis in two main ways. So now we've understood the innate knowledge thesis, and we've seen two different views on it. One was Chomsky's view, and another was the Carruthers view. Peter Carruthers and Noam Chomsky's view of the innate knowledge thesis. Now, how some attack the innate knowledge thesis, that means now we are reading the criticisms of this thesis. First, they offer accounts of how sense experience or intuition and deduction provide the knowledge that is claimed to be innate. That how, you know, the knowledge that sense experience or through intuition we gain that, how can you say that that knowledge is innate, that it is already present in us? Second, they directly criticize the innate knowledge thesis itself. The classic statement of the second line of attack is presented in Locke's essay. Locke raises the issue of just what innate knowledge is. Particular instances of knowledge are supposed to be in our minds as part of our rational makeup, but how are they in our minds? So, the first way they say that, how do you say that we gain this innate knowledge, that it is already present? And, matlab, how sensor experience, matlab, how deduction and intuition provide the knowledge that is claimed to be innate? Okay, so malaf, first of all is the empiricist. They say that whatever knowledge the some of the rationalists are saying are innate is innate. The empiricists try to explain how that same knowledge is gained through sense experience and not because it is innate. Even some rationalists who believe in the innate, not in the intuition deduction thesis, according to them, even they try to explain that how some knowledge that the some of the rationalists are saying is to be innate. The They explain it how we get it through intuition. So the first line of attack is they try to explain different lines on how we gain the same knowledge as claimed to be innate through other means. But the second criticism is directly the thesis itself, that Locke has directly asked the question, what do you mean by that the knowledge is present in our minds? If the implication is that we all consciously have this knowledge, it is plainly false. So according to Locke, he states that if the point is that we already have this knowledge in our mind, then it is plainly false. It cannot be true. Propositions often given as an examples of innate knowledge, even such plausible candidates as a principle that the same thing cannot be and not be, are not consciously accepted by children and those with severe cognitive limitations. So according to Locke, how can a child, have something and not have something at the same time? So if the point of calling such principles innate is not to imply that they are or have been consciously accepted by all rational beings, then it is hard to see what the point is. So with innate, what Locke is trying to say is that by innate you should mean that that knowledge is has been accepted by everybody and not that it is already present in the beings. Okay, no propositions can be said to be in the mind, which it never yet knew. So, according to him, it is not possible that the mind is never aware of something that is already present in it. Proponents of innate knowledge might respond that some knowledge is innate in that we have the capacity to have it. That claim, while true, is of little interest, however, if the capacity of knowing be the natural impression contended for, all the truths a man ever comes to know will by this account be every one of them innate. And this great point will amount to no more but only an improper way of speaking, which will, whilst it pretends to assert the contrary, says nothing different from those who deny innate principles. For nobody, I think, ever denied that the mind was capable of knowing several truths. So the point is the same thing, that the innate knowledge thing, that how can you say that everything is already present in our mind and that mind is not even aware of it? If the mind is not aware of it, then how can you say that it is already present in it? And you know if the capacity of knowing be the natural impression, all the truths a man ever comes to know will by this account be every one of them innate. Then again, if somebody is also saying that according to this matlab, that we only have the ability to know it, we only have the capacity to know it, and we don't already know it, then it is not much different, because having the capacity to know a particular truth is not much different than knowing the truth itself. So, for no, Locke thus challenges defenders of the innate knowledge thesis to present an account of innate knowledge that allows their position to be both true and interesting. A narrow interpretation of innateness faces counterexamples of rational individuals who do not meet its conditions. A generous interpretation implies that all our knowledge, even that clearly provided by experience, is innate. That even the knowledge that is we gain through experience is again innate, and it is not that we have gained it through experience. Defenders of innate knowledge take up Locke's challenge. Leibniz responds in new essays by appealing to an account of innateness in terms of natural potential to avoid Locke's dilemma. Consider Peter's Carruthers similar reply. तो Peter Carruthers ने what reply किया था to Locke's challenge to the innate knowledge thesis. We have noted that while one form of nativism claims that knowledge is innate in the sense of being present as such from birth, it might also be maintained that knowledge is innate in the sense of being innately determined to make its appearance at some stage in childhood. This latter thesis is surely the most plausible version of nativism. That, that the innate knowledge, that the signs that the knowledge is already present in us is shown in some stages of childhood. So Carather claims that our innate knowledge is determined through evolutionary selection. Evolution has resulted in our being determined to know certain things at particular stages of our life as part of our natural development. Experiences provide the occasion for our consciously believing the known propositions but not the basis of our knowledge of them. So experience provides us of being aware of it, okay, and believing that we know it. So through experience we become aware and start believing in the knowledge that we have that kind of knowledge, but it is not the basis of our knowledge. So according to Carather, as we've already seen the folk psychology thing, that some things are already shown at the particular stages of life. Carather thus has a ready reply to Locke's counterexamples of children and cognitively limited persons who do not believe propositions claimed to be instances of innate knowledge. The former have not yet reached the proper stage of development. The latter are persons in whom natural development has broken down. Okay, so now there's again one more thing that we have seen ki how in children and people with cognitive limitations, they are not consciously aware of it. How do you say, okay, you say that, or it is already present, and then what about the people with cognitive limitations who don't have that proper IQ, who don't have the general IQ and all that stuff, then what about them? So Carther has a ready reply to this, is that they do not believe propositions came to be instances of innate knowledge. They had not yet reached the proper stage of development. And there are persons in whom natural development has broken down. So, when Locke criticizes the innate knowledge thesis by asking the question of what about the children or what about the people with cognitive limitations who are not, that intellectually developed, so what about them, then what about their innate knowledge? So Carather replies to this that they are not aware of their innate knowledge because their natural development or their natural system has broken down. A serious problem for the innate knowledge thesis remains, however. We know a proposition only if it is true, we believe it, and our belief is warranted. Rationalists who assert the existence of innate knowledge are not just claiming that, as a matter of human evolution, God's design, or some other factor at a particular point in our development, certain sorts of experiences trigger our belief in particular propositions in a way that does not involve our learning them from the experiences. So now there is another problem with the innate knowledge thesis, and that is we know a proposition only if it is true. Okay, so that is the there. A rationalist who assert the existence of innate knowledge are not just claiming that as a matter of human evolution, God's design, or some other factor at a particular point in our development, certain sorts of experiences trigger our beliefs in particular proposition in a way that does not involve our learning them from the experiences. So, according to the innate knowledge thesis, we have not learned those propositions to be true, but those experiences are just triggering it, and we already have it present in them. Their claim is even bolder. In at least some of these cases, are empirically triggered but not empirically warranted. Belief is nonetheless warranted and so known. How can these beliefs be warranted if they do not gain their warrant from the experiences that cause us to have them or from intuition or deduction? So the criticism is that you're saying that the experience are the one who who trigger this innate knowledge. Then how come that innate knowledge is not warranted by the same experience? And warrant is, as we have discussed before, it's the additional element of the propositions that make a guess or a certain statement to be true. Okay, so how come the experiences that trigger our innate knowledge do not warrant it then. Some rationalists think that a reliabilist account of warrant provides the answer. According to reliabilism, beliefs are warranted if they are formed by a process that generally produces true beliefs rather than false ones. The true beliefs that constitute our innate knowledge are warranted, then, because they are formed as the result of a reliable belief forming process. So yes, that the process through which that knowledge is gained and the beliefs that we have, the process has to be true, and we have to engage in a process of true beliefs. So Carruthers maintains that innate beliefs will count as known, provided that the process through which they come to be innate is a reliable one. So, the process tends to generate beliefs that are true. He argues that natural selection results in formation of some beliefs and is a truth reliable process. That means that the beliefs in the first place that are formed through a process, which will only result in true beliefs. So the truth reliable process, that again, as Peter Carruthers maintains, that innate beliefs will count as known, provided that the process through which they come to be innate is a reliable one, that the process through which it is embedded in our body is a very reliable process, and that whatever we know about the knowledge is true, and it generates the beliefs that are true. Okay, so the answer that is said, that how come, if okay, that if the experiences are the one who trigger our innate knowledge, then are the experiences warranting them also? So the answer to this, as like given by characters also, is that these are warranted in the first place when they are embedded into our soul and system. An appeal to reliabilism or a similar causal theory of warrant may well be the best way to develop the innate knowledge thesis. Even so, some difficulties remain. First, reliabilist accounts of warrant are themselves quite controversial. So, the reliabilist account, that means the belief forming process is reliable and truth generates the truth, is quite controversial in themselves. There are some controversies that we may discuss later. And second, rationalists must give an account of innate knowledge that maintains and explains the distinction between innate knowledge and non innate knowledge. And it is not clear that they will be able to do so within such an account of warrant. So, second is that if you're talking about that reliabilism, then what is the difference between innate and non innate knowledge? What is the distinction? Suppose, for the sake of argument, that we have innate knowledge of some proposition P. So now here they're trying to explain it with the help of an example. So there is something P and we have innate knowledge about it. Now what makes our knowledge that P innate? To sharpen the question, what difference between our knowledge that P and a clear case of non-innate knowledge, say our knowledge that something is red based on our current visual experience of a red table, makes the former innate and the latter not innate? Now, as we're talking about non-innate knowledge, for example, we see a table. Okay, it's a new table, and it's a red table. So that knowledge is of course innate, non-innate, because we didn't know there is a red table in the room. Where we saw it only when we entered. So it is through our sense experience that we knew of that knowledge. So how can you distinguish? Okay, and then they say that there is a subject P which has innate knowledge, of which we have innate knowledge. So how do you distinguish between this innate and non-innate knowledge? How do you distinguish that okay, this knowledge about P is innate and the knowledge about the red table, that it is red, is non-innate? What difference between our knowledge that P and a clear case of non-innate knowledge, say our knowledge as something, in each case we have a true warranted belief. In each case, presumably, our belief gains its warrant from the fact that it meets a particular causal condition. Example, it is produced by a reliable process. So, in both the cases, about the red table also and the knowledge of P, it is warranted. That means it is completely true and not just a random guess or a random statement. So, in both the cases, it is very true because it is produced by a reliable process. So, that is what is reliabilism. And that reliable process in the case of the red table is the visual experience, and in the case of P is the innate knowledge, and that the process in the very beginning that the knowledge was embedded with our soul was reliable. In each case, the causal process is one in which an experience causes us to believe the proposition at hand, that P, that something is read. For, as defenders of innate knowledge admit, our belief that P is triggered by an experience, as is our belief that something is read. The insight behind the innate knowledge thesis seems to be that the difference between our innate and non innate knowledge lies in the relation between our experience and our belief in each case. So, the same thing, that it is the experience that triggers our innate knowledge about something. The experience that causes our belief that P does not contain the information that P, while our visual experience of a red table does contain the information that something is red. So, the experience that causes our belief that P does not contain the information that P. Matlab, for example, our visual experience of the red table, it contains the information that something is red. Yet, exactly what is the nature of this containment relation between what our experience is on the one hand and what we believe on the other, that is missing in the one case but present in each other? The nature of the experience belief relation seems quite similar in each. So, the nature of the experience belief, that we first experience something, that we believe in it, that is very similar in both the cases. Whether we are aware in the first case that whether P, our belief that P does not contain the information about P, that P, it is P, and like our, you know, visual experience of a red table does contain the information that something is red. So when we visually experience it, that experience has the information that it is red, but the experience that causes our belief, well, our experience does not cause that P does not contain that P. That means that there is a relation between the experience belief. What we experience is what we believe. The causal relation between the experience that triggers our belief that P and our belief that P is contingent, as is the fact that the belief forming process is reliable. The same is true of our experience of a red table and our belief that something is red. So we believe that something is red and then we experience that the table is red. Okay, well, we experience that the table is red, so we have a belief that yes, there is something red present in the room. The causal relation between the experience and our belief is again contingent. We might have been so constructed that the experience we describe as being appeared to readily caused us to believe not that something is red, but that something is hot. The process that takes us from the experience to our belief is also only contingently reliable. So, the process that takes us from the experience to our belief is only contingently reliable. Moreover, if our experience of a red table contains the information that something is red, then the fact, not the existence of a reliable belief forming process between the two, should be the reasons why the experience warrants our belief. सो जैसे कि हमारे एक्सपीरियंस और हमारे बिलीफ का रिलेशन जो है वो कंटिंजेंट है. कंटिंजेंट का मतलब कि वी मे नॉट बी वेरी श्योर दैट इट इज़ ट्रू ओनली. जैसे कि इट मे अपियर दैट समथिंग was red, but it appeared to us as something was hot, hot. Like being appeared to redly caused us to believe not that something is red, but that something is hot. तो कोई चीज़ हो सकता है कि जो हमें दिखती है कि यू नो हॉट है, बट एक्चुअली में वो लाल थी. Okay, because of course, so the process that takes us from the experience to our belief is also only contingently reliable. तो हमारे एक्सपीरियंस से बिलीव की जो प्रोसेस है वो भी कंटिजेंटली रिलायबल है. दैट मीन्स वी कैन नॉट बी वेरी श्योर ऑफ इट. बाई चांस इट कैन बी रिलायबल. Moreover, if our experience of a red table contains the information that something is red, then the fact, not the existence, of a reliable belief forming process between the two should be the reason why experience warrants our belief. तो क्योंकि वो फैक्ट कि क्योंकि वो हमें रेड दिख रहा है, हम उसको रेड एक्सपीरियंस कर रहे हैं, वो है जो हमारे बिलीफ को वारंट करता है, ना कि वो बिलीफ फॉर्मिंग प्रोसेस. Okay, so by appealing to reliabilism or some other causal theory of warrant, rationalists may obtain a way to explain how innate knowledge can be warranted. तो हो सकता है कि वो ये कह सकते हैं कि इनेट नॉलेज है वो वारंट कैसे होती है, लेकिन फिर भी वो ये डिस्टिंक्शन नहीं दे सकते कि इनेट और नॉन इनेट नॉलेज के बीच में क्या डिस्टिंक्शन है. तो इस वजह से ये जो एक क्रिटिसिज्म है इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस का, कि व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन इनेट एंड नॉन इनेट नॉलेज दैट स्टैंड स्टिल। सो यू नो कितना भी अच्छा डिफेंस क्यों ना हो इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस का, दिस criticism still stands that there is no true distinction between innate versus non innate knowledge. नाउ द इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस, ये इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस जो है वो इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस से थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस है। कैसे है डिफरेंट, अभी हम देख लेते हैं। Now, according to the innate concept thesis, some of our concepts have not been gained from experience. They are instead part of our rational makeup, and experience simply triggers a process by which we consciously grasp them. तो अभी तक तो whatever we have read in innate knowledge thesis, the same thing is going on. The main concern motivating the rationalist should be familiar by now. The content of some concepts seems to outstrip anything we could have gained from experience. Okay, so it is again talking about that something was innate, but this time they're not talking about knowledge but the concepts. An example of this reasoning is presented by Descartes in the Meditations. Although he sometimes seems committed to the view that all our ideas are innate, he there classifies our ideas views that all our ideas are innate. He there classifies our ideas as adventitious, invented by us, and innate. Adventitious ideas, such as the sensation of heat, are gained directly through sense experience. Ideas invented by us, such as the idea of a hippogriff, are created by us from other ideas we possess. तो डिस्कास जो है वो इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस कि हमारे पास उन कॉन्सेप्ट्स की इनेट वो होती है कि द कॉन्सेप्ट्स अबाउट समथिंग आर इनेट एंड नॉट द एक्चुअल नॉलेज ऑफ इट। एंड अकॉर्डिंग टू डिस्कास there are some things that we create by us, invent by us, जैसे कि when we touch a hot glass or a hot cup, then we immediately feel the thing to be hot. So that is something that we have gained through experience by the sensation of heat. And all the ideas that are invented by us are created by other ideas that we already have, like the ideas of God or extended matter of substance and of perfect triangle, are placed in our minds by God at creation. So when we were being created by God, it was God who had placed these ideas into our head. Consider Descartes' argument that our concept of God as an infinitely perfect being is innate. Our concept of God is not directly gained in experience, as particular tastes, sensation, or mental images might be. Its content is beyond what we could ever construct by applying available mental operations to what experience directly provides. जैसे डिस्कास का कहना है कि हम लोग गॉड को एक बहुत ही infinitely perfect being मानते हैं. So this concept of God is innate. That was already present in us, because we cannot experience something like this, and no matter how much we use our and apply our mental operations, we will never be able to experience something like infinitely perfect being like we perceive God to be. So our concept of God is innate and not something that we have gained or can gain from experience. From experience, we can gain the concept of a being with finite amounts of various perfections. One, for example, that is finitely knowledgeable, powerful, and good. So, from experience, we can only gain knowledge or concept of a person that is finitely good and intelligent and all that, but not of an infinite perfect being. We cannot, however, move from these empirical concepts to the concept of a being of infinite perfection. I must not think that just as my conceptions of rest and darkness are arrived at by negating movement and light, so my perception of the infinite is arrived at not by means of a true idea, but merely negating the finite. So, anyways, Descartes supplements this argument by another. Not only is the content of our concept of God beyond what experience can provide, the concept is a prerequisite for an employment of the concept of finite perfection gained from experience. So, according to Descartes, when we have a concept of God as an infinitely perfect being, only then can we have a concept of a finite being with all those perfections and imperfections. Okay, so my perception of the finite, that is God, is in some way prior to my perception of the infinite, that is of the finite, that is myself. How could I understand that I doubted or desired that is lacked something, that I was not wholly perfect, unless there were in me some idea of a more perfect which being enabled to recognize my own defects by comparison? third meditation. That means that Descartes is trying to say that मैं कैसे अपने आप की गलतियाँ, अपने आप के imperfections ढूंढूंगा जब तक मुझे उस perfect चीज़ के बारे में idea नहीं होगा. So I have a concept of that perfect thing, and only then when I compared it to myself, I realized that I was finite and I was imperfect. So that means that concept of the perfect being, infinite perfect being, was already present. And it is because of that concept that we are able to distinguish between the finite and the infinite and the different imperfections. And empiricist response to this general line of argument is given by Locke. First, there is the problem of explaining what is it for someone to have an innate concept. If having an innate concept entails consciously entertaining it at present or in the past, then Descartes' position is open to obvious counterexample. Young children, people from other cultures, don't consciously entertain the concept of God and have not done so. So then now this time the criticism that innate concept faces, one is that what do you mean by this innate concept? And well, if the innate concept was already present in us, then what about the young children, or what about people of other cultures who do not believe God to be that infinite perfect being? Then what about their innate concept? Second, there is the objection that we have no need to appeal to innate concepts in the first place. Contrary to Descartes' argument, we can explain how experience provides all our ideas, including those the rationalists take to be innate, and with just the content that the rationalists attribute to them. So the empiricists say that there is no need that we attribute something to being innate and a concept to being innate. We can very well explain those concepts and ideas to be gained from experience. So the true criticism, and one of them, is that how come then from people from other culture do not perceive God to be that infinite perfect being? That means that it is not an innate concept. It is not already present in us from the very start. Leibniz's new essays offers a rationalist reply to the first concern. So the first concern, that how come then from the other cultures they do not experience the innate concept of perfect being. So Locke puts forth the image of the mind as a blank slate on which experience write. Leibniz offers us the image of a block of marble, the veins of which determine what sculpted figures it will accept. So according to Leibniz, when he answers the first question, first criticism, he says that our mind is like a marble, block of marble, and the veins of that marble, like the veins of our mind, determine what insight and what image of something we accept. Leibniz's metaphor contains an insight that Locke misses. The mind plays a role in determining the nature of its contents. This point does not, however, require the adoption of innate concept thesis. Okay, so that it is the mind who plays a role in determining the nature of the concepts that we already have. Now, this point doesn't need the innate concept thesis. That means our mind is independent of something that is not present in us already. Locke might still point out that we are not required to have the concepts themselves and the ability to use them innately. In contemporary terms, what we are required to have is the right hardware that allows for the optimal running of the actual software. For Locke, there are no constraints here. For Leibniz, only a particular type of software is indeed able to be supported by the extant hardware. Put differently, the hardware itself determines what software can be optimally run for a Leibnizian. So, according to Leibniz, it is upon the hardware that determines what software can be run in it. That means it is upon the mind to accept what concept it accepts and how it puts together the concept of it. Rationalists have responded to the second part of the empiricist attack on the innate concept. The empiricists claim that the thesis is without basis, as all our ideas can be explained or derived from experience. So now rationalists have said, according to empiricists, all the ideas that are, all the concepts that have been explained by the innate concept thesis can be explained that how we gain them through experience. So the difficulties are illustrated by Locke's account. According to Locke, experience consists in external sensation, inner reflection. So according to Locke, what experience is, it consists external sensation and inner reflection, that we sense something, we sense external objects first, and then we reflect them in our inner body. All our ideas are either simple or complex, with the former being received by us passively in sensation or reflection, and the latter being built by the mind from simple materials through various mental operations. So the ideas are simple. When we perceive them, that is when we build them into complex things. Right at the start, the account of how simple ideas are gained is open to an obvious counterexample acknowledged. but then set aside by Hume presenting his own empiricist theory. Consider the mental image of a particular shade of blue. If Locke is right, the idea is a simple one and should be passively received by the mind through experience. So, what David Hume says is, suppose, therefore, a person to have enjoyed his sight for 30 years and to have become perfectly acquainted with colors of all kinds, except one particular shade of blue, for instance, which it never has been his fortune to meet with. Let all the different shades of that color, except that single one, be placed before him, descending gradually from the deepest to the lightest. It is plain that he will perceive a blank where that shade is wanting, and will be sensible that there is a greater distance in that place between the contiguous colors than in any other. Now I ask whether it be possible for him, from his own imagination, to supply this deficiency and raise up to himself the idea of that particular shade, though it had never been conveyed to him by his senses. Now Hume here points out something. Okay, so now yeah, here Hume is explaining his empiricist theory. So his counter example for the innate concept thesis is first that, for example, there is a man who has had a great vision for the past 30 years and has been come across with all the shades of a color, of not only one color but all the colors and all of its shades. But there's just one shade of blue that the person couldn't see or never had the chance to see. Now, for example, that shade of blue, starting from the darkest of its shade to the lightest of that shade, that particular shade of blue is presented before him. Now, can he, from his imagination, just by himself, guess at okay, what that color is, though it had never been conveyed to him by his senses? I believe there are, but few will be of the opinion that he can. Even when it comes to such simple ideas as the image of a particular shade of blue, the mind seems to be more than a blank slate on which experience rises. The Hume has criticized the innate concept thesis by saying that yes, that some people say that yes, he can recognize the blue color, and it is because of the experience that he has gained by looking at all the colors. The main question is whether the veins in Leibniz metaphor should count as a part of the knowledge or just as part of our biological mental architecture. All the knowledge we can ever acquire is as constrained by the type of beings we are. This does not require our posting that concepts be part of the inner workings at the beginning of our lives. So Hume says that it is not really necessary that we assign the ideas to be innate within us, just because like we have different concepts of God because we are different people, and that is how we will work. So the type of beings we are constrains the type of concepts and ideas we have of our thing, and not because those are innate concepts. On the other hand, consider too our concept of a particular color, say red. Critics of Locke's account have pointed out the weakness in his explanation of how we gain such a concept by mental operation of abstraction on individual cases. For one thing, it makes the incorrect assumption that various instances of a particular concept share a common feature. Character puts the objection as follows. Now, Character has put the objection forward as, in fact, problems arise for empiricists even in connection with the very simplest concepts, such as those of color. So, for empiricists, even with colors, the simplest of things arise with a problem. For it is false that all instances of a given color share some common feature. That not all instances, not all shades of a color shade of a color can share a common feature. No, they cannot, because if they do share a common feature, then that would answer the question. In which case, we cannot acquire the concept of that color by extracting the common feature of our experience. Thus, consider the concept red. Do all shades of red have something in common? If so, what? It is surely false that individual shades of red consist, as if they are of two distinguishable elements, a general redness together with a particular shade. Rather, redness consists in a continuous range of shades, each of which is only just distinguishable from its neighbor. Acquiring the concept red is a matter of learning the extent of the range. So that shade of red that we acquire is not through experience, because not all shades of red have something in common. They do have something redness in it, but not a common feature in them. For another thing, Locke's account of concept acquisition from particular experiences seems circular. For noticing or attending to a common feature of various things presupposes that you already possess the concept of the feature in question. So now Locke is pointing out to the criticism by saying that it is only through the learning the extent of the range that from what range do you say that a particular color is red? That is when you learn it, and not through experience that you gain the knowledge of that thing. For example, the shade of the color. Okay, so like they're saying that even if when you say that there is a common feature to that thing, that means that you already possess the concept of that thing, that you already possess the knowledge of that common feature in question. Consider in this regard Locke's account of how we gain our concept of causation. In the notice that our senses take of the constant vicissitude of things, we cannot but observe that several particulars, both qualities and substances, begin to exist, and that they receive their existence from the due application and operation of some other being. From this observation, we get our ideas of cause and effect. We cannot but observe that several particulars, both qualities and substances, begin to exist, and that they receive their existence from the due application and operations of other being. From this observation, we get our ideas of cause and effect. So, for example, that we get to know about some things by the working, the operation of some other being on that thing, from of that some other thing. So we get our concept of causation from our observation that some things receive their existence from the application and operation from some other things. For example, like we have already studied that Nyaya concept, that it is the lamp's light that make us, that give us the knowledge of the things present in the room. Okay, for example, if there's a chair kept in front of you, but if you are in the room and it's complete darkness, you don't have the knowledge of the chair. But when the light is on, that is when you become aware of the existence. So you become aware of the existence of that thing by the application of that some other thing on it. And the application of that other thing was the application of light. Yet to be able to make this observation, we must have our minds primed to do so. Rationalists argue that we cannot make this observation until we already have the concept of causation. So, according to rationalists, we already have that concept of causation, that some other thing is caused and the other thing has the effect of it. So rationalists argue that we already have that concept of causation, and that is why we are able to identify it. Empiricists argue that our minds are constituted in a certain way so that we can gain our ideas of causation and of power in a non-circular manner, that we all not already know of it, but it is through the application of other things, through the experience, that we gain of that knowledge. Rationalists would argue that Locke's account of how we gain our idea of power displays a similar circularity. The mind being every day informed by the senses of the alteration of those simple ideas, it observes in things without and taking notice how one comes to an end and ceases to be. So basically, this paragraph, the mind is being every day informed by the senses. So it basically tells about, uh, you know, tells us that how our mind is informed of the everyday changes around us by the senses, that it is only through the sense experience that we have the alteration of simple ideas, we observe things, we take notice of how things come to an end or how other things begin or start existing before us. For example, that when you enter into a new room, okay, into a new room, and you suddenly see a round table that you have not seen before, that it is with the help of your senses that you have started to realize the existence of some other thing, right? So and we come by the idea of power, though considering the possibility of changes in our ideas made by experiences and our own choices. Yet, to consider this possibility of some things making a change in others, we must already have a concept of power, rationalists would say. The rationalist people say that when you say that, okay, there is some other application of things that make us aware of other things, that means we should already have that innate concept of power within us. That yes, there are other things that are making us aware of the other things. Empiricists say that we actually need is for our minds to be able to recognize this by having the correct abilities and faculties. That it's just that our mind should have those abilities, and then we will be able to recognize the application of other things that help us to realize the existence of other things. So just as we don't need to have a concept telling us how it is what we have binocular vision, being able to recognize change would be cashed out by us having the requisite faculty enabling us to do so. So the ability to recognize change is because we have the faculty and the ability to do so, and not because it is an innate concept. Another way to meet at least some of these challenges to an empiricist account of the origin of our concepts is to revise our understanding of the content of our concepts so as to bring them more in line with what experience will clearly provide. So Hume famously takes this approach. Okay, so now we have already studied about Hume, his impressions, his ideas, and how it is because of these impressions that we have the ideas. Okay, so impressions are the contents of our experiences, our sensations, feelings, emotions, desires that we gain through our experience of the external world. And then ideas are mental contents that are derived from the impressions. So ideas are not independent, they cannot originate and generate on their own, and only it is because of the impressions that we gain through the senses of the external world that we have the ideas of something. So simple ideas are just the copies of impressions. We already have the impression of something, and our ideas are just the copies of that impressions, and that ideas are not something original or imaginative. Okay, so complex ideas are derived from impressions by compounding, transposing, augmenting, or diminishing them. Given that all our ideas are thus gained from experience, Hume offers us the following method for determining the content of any idea and thereby the meaning of any term takes to express it. When we entertain, therefore, any suspicion that a philosophical term is employed without any meaning or idea, we need but inquire from what impression is that supposed idea derived. So, according to Hume, when we say that we have got this idea, it is not something created by our own mind, but we just need to find that what was the impression from where we got the idea of it. Using this test, Hume draws out one of the most important implications of the empiricist denial of the innate concept thesis. So how Hume if experience is indeed the source of all ideas, then our experiences also determine the content of our ideas. Our ideas of causation, of substance, of right and wrong have their content determined by the experience that provide them. So, how Hume supports the denial of empiricist of the innate thesis is that all the contents of the ideas and all the ideas that we have is gained through experience. Okay, so those experiences are unable to support the content that many rationalists and some empiricists such as Locke attribute to the corresponding ideas. Our inability to explain how some concepts with the contents the rationalists attribute to them are gained from experience should not lead us to adopt the innate concept thesis. It should lead us to accept a more limited view of the contents for those concepts and thereby a more limited view of our ability to describe and understand the world. For example, our idea of causation. Descartes takes it to be innate. Hume's empiricist account severely limits its content. Our idea of causation is derived from a feeling of expectation rooted in our experiences of the constant conjunction of similar causes and effects. So हमारा जो causation का idea है, according to Hume, is because we have already experienced similar cases of cause and effect, and that is how our idea of causation arises, and not because it is an innate concept as Locke argues. It appears then that this idea of a necessary connection among events rises from a number of similar instances which occur of the constant conjunction of these events, nor can that idea ever be suggested by any one of these instances surveyed in all possible lights and positions. So sometimes the necessary connection that we feel, the intuition or the innate thing that we feel that okay, we already know this or we already predicted that something like this would happen is only because similar instances have happened with us before, and that we have now formed a habit of that. So that this idea of a necessary connection among events arises from a number of similar instances which occur. So because that instances have occurred one after the other again and again, that is how we have developed the idea of it. Okay, and we have already being in a habit of that occurrence. So there is nothing in a number of instances different from every single instance. Okay, it is not supposed to be exactly similar, no, but there is something common, and after the repetition of so many instances, the mind is carried by habit, And when the event appears before us, we expect the usual outcome of it. So this connection is not gained from anything, but it is because of the impression of the experience that we have gained. So the source of our idea and experience determines its content. Suitably to this experience, therefore, we may define a cause to be an object followed by another. And where all the objects similar to the first are followed by objects similar to the second, we may therefore suitably to this experience from other definition of cause and call an object followed by another, and whose experience always conveys a thought of other. So that means because that event, that object has occurred to us before, has happened with us before, that is why when the object or when the instance occurs before us, we somehow expect the result of it. Our claims and any knowledge we may have about causal connections in the world turn out that because, given the limited content of an empirically based concept of causation, to be claims and knowledge about the constant condition of events of our own feelings of expectation. Thus, the initial disagreement between rationalism and empiricists about the source of ideas leads us to one about their content and thereby the content of our descriptions and knowledge of the world. Okay, so our claim that any knowledge we may have about cause turn out to be empirically obtained, to be obtained through experience, as we have discussed in the fewer paragraphs before.